Welcome back to The Real Story. You know, there's an old saying out there about losing the battle to win the war. And while the fight for ownership over TikTok is certainly no war, it does seem that the US might be about to win this battle. After many little battles spanning over 5 years and across 3 different administrations, it seems that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, may finally make a deal with the US government regarding ownership of the wildly popular application. President Trump is expected, by many, to sign a deal that would give American investors most of the control over the app, allowing the American company that ultimately buys it to safeguard user data, an issue that lies at the center of TikTok's use in America today. Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison is slated to serve as the app's security provider once the deal is signed. And Oracle, as well as the private equity firm Silver Lake, will reportedly own about 80% of the company, leaving less than 20% of the company to ByteDance, its current parent owner. And with this deal in the works, the new board will be getting a copy of the app's algorithm, which one White House official said would be retrained on US data and then continuously monitored for safety by Oracle. And here's the real kicker: China will not be able to access any data of American users under this new agreement. So here with more is Hunter Gaylor, CEO of Marketbridge Advisors and board member of the New Journey PAC. Hunter, thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure to join you.
So the critical issue just at the center of this whole story is protecting the data of American users. Would you be confident with this new deal as it stands now that we could effectively protect that user data?
Well, look, I mean, control of user data is very important in any organization and any country for that matter. So do I feel optimistic that, under this White House leadership, that this transaction goes through, that it's in, the hands of, a US tech giant versus a Chinese tech giant? Yes. Do I feel that with, people like Larry Ellison and Oracle, running the board, is that going to be good? Yes. My only concern is if you're looking at it from a data perspective, yes, this is a good move, right? Because you don't want your enemies essentially to have, foreign ownership and use it for spying purposes. But I want to be very careful here because there's a very fine line in this is when government owns or controls the means of speech, right? Freedom becomes contingent, okay? And so, I think it's a very, very clear thing that I want your audience to understand is what you said is the government not being directly involved in the company.
Do you think this really is appropriately walking that fine line, or do you think that we're maybe getting a little too close, dangerously close, to government controlling privately owned apps and therefore having power they shouldn't have?
Yeah, it's a very very fine line because the core premise of free markets is that companies own what they legitimately create.
Yes.
So when you force a sale or a government control of a company or parts of it, it undermines property rights and it sets a very dangerous precedent. And that's what we have to be careful of. Now, if you want to go and you talk about the slippery slope towards state capitalism, then that's a whole nother slippery slope because the government starts forcing its ownership deals for quote national security or quote influence. It gradually becomes state capitalism, and that's where political power intervenes heavily in private enterprises, and I think this undermines competitiveness. However, that being said, that's my caveat. That being said, do I think it's better in the hands of the U.S. than in China? Absolutely. It'd be no different than saying I'd rather have stuff made in America than made in China.
About whether or not TikTok is really worth saving and speaking to the social impact of it and just social media broadly. Clearly, there are many people who spend hours and hours all day long on TikTok, and that doesn't seem to be healthy or good for society, just broadly. So I want to ask you, just in your own personal opinion here, do you think TikTok itself, as a platform, is really worth saving, so to speak, or keeping around?
I think you could answer it in 2 different ways. If you ask the shareholders, they're valuing the company at $330 billion is what ByteDance was. So one could argue, yes, from a monetary perspective, we want to save it because it's just business, right? They don't look at it anything else, black and white. It's just a business decision, right? Versus, my personal take on TikTok. I mean, I scroll on it. I'm not a religious TikTok user. I'm on Instagram and X and things like that, but I mainly use it for news. So, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I do know that people make a lot of money on the platform. And, in this what I'll call content-driven era, or content-driven century,
Yes.
it's content's king, and that's it's a very famous saying. And so I think really it comes down to the individual, right? Where do you want to spend most of your time, in TikTok, or do you want to actually try the real world?
That's really interesting. Just out of curiosity then, do you happen to have any more concrete data about how much money people can make on this platform and how big the sort of, let's say, economic ecosphere is surrounding the application?
Well, to speak in direct terms, if you look at any of the major influencers out there that have businesses or brands, I mean, they're selling a lot. Shopify numbers are up because of, how they're doing the shopping now. You have apps like Whatnot and the rest of these auction things. So they're really starting, the video platforms for short form videos for sailing is going through. And you're seeing, by the way, major companies start adjusting to this. Amazon's doing it with live shopping now. And you're seeing that on where they're streaming their shopping channels for various stores. So, in terms of, how much money I make on TikTok, I don't make any money on TikTok, right? Do we use it, and does it occasionally get us a client here or there with some ads? Yeah, occasionally. I wouldn't say it's bringing in millions, but there's definitely a lot of users. And I don't think the market or the owners of ByteDance valuation, when you start pushing valuations like $330 billion, by the way, that's an article according to Reuters, that was August 28th of this year, as their revenue surpasses Meta. So, just that alone, right, has, some pondering that needs to be done. I'd like to see the actual details once the transaction is complete, what it actually looks like, who's actually in charge, and then we can start doing a deeper conversation on what the ramifications are.
I want to bring you back on the show so we can take a deep dive into it, and you can tell us whether or not you think it's really a good deal or not for the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to.
Okay. Then in the meantime, thank you for being here, and thank you for your insight and your analysis, and we look forward to having you back on the show soon, Hunter.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Coming up next, today's edition of Real Good News goes out to a man whose music has changed the world, one song at a time. More details after the break.